Get ready to dream. Close your eyes, the story is about to begin. On a cold and foggy morning, Beatrice, a young historian with a passion for medieval mysteries, arrived at Riverton Castle. The imposing building, located in the heart of England, was a popular destination for tourist tours, but Beatrice was there for a deeper purpose, to investigate the castle's rich history and perhaps uncover some secret buried by time. During the guided tour, Beatrice felt an inexplicable pull towards an abandoned wing of the castle. While the group followed the guide through the grand rooms adorned with tapestries and armor, she couldn't take her eyes off a dark and uninviting corridor. Determined to satisfy her curiosity, Beatrice discreetly separated from the group to explore on her own. Entering the abandoned wing, the young historian felt a change in the atmosphere. The air seemed thicker, almost tangible, and a feeling of being watched made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Following her instinct, Beatrice wandered down dusty corridors until she found a door partially hidden by a purple velvet curtain. With her heart racing, she pushed the creaky door open and stepped into a room lit only by the faint light filtering through the dirty windows. In the center of the room, a strange presence seemed to slowly materialize. It was a noble-looking man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, floating a few inches above the ground. His sad, deep eyes met Beatrice's, and she felt a strange connection to this ethereal being. Who are you?" Beatrice asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Edward," the ghost replied in a melancholy tone. "I've been trapped in this castle for centuries, a victim of a betrayal that condemned me to this fate." Beatrice, unsure how to react, asked, "What happened to you, Edward? Why are you trapped here?" Edward sighed deeply, as if reliving a deep pain. "I was a nobleman, heir to Riverton Castle. I was betrayed by those I trusted, falsely accused of crimes I did not commit. A curse was cast upon me, and since then, my soul has been bound to this place, unable to find peace." Beatrice felt a wave of compassion wash over her. "That's terrible, Edward. There must be a way to free you." The ghost looked at her with a mix of hope and disbelief. "There is a way, but it's dangerous and full of obstacles. Would you really be willing to help me?" Without hesitation, Beatrice firmly replied, "Yes, I will help you. You don't deserve to spend eternity trapped here for something you didn't do." Edward smiled for the first time in centuries. "Thank you, Beatrice. Your kindness gives me hope. The key to my freedom is hidden somewhere in this castle, but it's protected by riddles and traps left by the castle's former inhabitants." Determined to help her new friend, Beatrice began exploring every corner of the castle, guided by the clues Edward provided. With each discovery, she felt more connected to him, as if their souls were destined to meet. During their explorations, Beatrice often talked with Edward, learning more about his past life and the injustice he suffered. "Edward, what was your life like before all this happened?" she asked one day. "I was happy," Edward said, with a nostalgic gleam in his eyes. "Although I have responsibilities as the heir, I love my life here. My family, my friends, everything was taken from me so cruelly." Beatrice felt a pang in her heart. "We're going to correct this injustice, Edward. I promise I will do everything in my power to free you." And so, the young historian threw herself into the mission of uncovering the secrets of Riverton Castle, determined to free Edward and possibly find a new purpose for her own life in the process. Beatrice, a young historian, was determined to find the lost amulet, the key to freeing Edward from his centuries-old prison. After discovering the existence of the object in an ancient book from the castle, she knew her quest would be arduous. The book, though old and worn, suggested that the amulet possessed extraordinary powers and was vital to breaking the curse that kept Edward trapped. With this revelation, Beatrice plunged into a meticulous investigation throughout the castle, exploring every nook and cranny in search of clues. During her excursions, she encountered a series of riddles and traps ingeniously left by the former inhabitants of Riverton Castle. In one of the darkest and least explored wings, Beatrice found a room filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. While investigating a heavy wooden chest, a subtle click echoed through the room, followed by the sound of gears moving. The floor beneath her feet began to slowly open, revealing a deadly trap. Before she could react, Beatrice felt a cold shiver, and suddenly, she was pulled back, away from danger. Edward, using his ghostly abilities, had saved her. "You need to be more careful, Beatrice," Edward said, his ethereal voice tinged with concern. "This castle is full of dangers you cannot face alone." "Thank you, Edward." "I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here," Beatrice replied, still breathless from the scare. "But I can't give up. I promised I would find a way to free you, and that's what I'm going to do." With Edward's help, Beatrice continued her search. They explored winding corridors, secret libraries, and underground chambers. With each step, Beatrice felt she was getting closer to discovering the location of the amulet. On a particularly gloomy afternoon, while examining an ancient, faded tapestry depicting scenes of battles and coronations, Beatrice noticed something peculiar. In the bottom corner of the tapestry, almost imperceptible due to the wear of time, there was an inscription in Latin. "Edward, look at this!" Beatrice exclaimed, pointing to the inscription. "It looks like a clue." Edward floated closer to her. "This inscription mentions a heart hidden in the belly of the serpent. It could be a metaphor for where the amulet is hidden," he suggested. Beatrice frowned, trying to decipher the meaning. The belly of the serpent, maybe it's referring to a structure in the castle. Something that resembles a serpent. With this new clue, Beatrice redoubled her efforts. She combed through old maps of the castle and found references to a winding passage known as the Serpent's Path, which led to a secret room beneath the main tower. Determined, she followed the directions from the maps, and with Edward by her side, she descended narrow staircases and dark tunnels. At the end of the Serpent's Path, they arrived at a hidden chamber, illuminated only by the faint light filtering through cracks in the walls. In the center of the room, on a stone pedestal, rested an ornate chest. With her heart pounding, Beatrice approached and opened the chest. Inside, she found an intricately carved wooden box. "This is it, Edward." "I feel like we're close," Beatrice said, carefully opening the box. Inside, there was an old scroll, written in faded ink. Edward read the scroll aloud. "The one who seeks the amulet must prove their worth by facing the guardians of the past and solving the riddle of time." Beatrice sighed, realizing the magnitude of the task ahead. "It's not going to be easy, but I'm ready. Let's find this amulet and free you, Edward." With renewed determination, Beatrice continued her quest, knowing that each step brought her closer to solving the castle's mystery and freeing Edward's tormented spirit. The discovery of Beatrice's ancestral connection to Riverton Castle was a devastating shock, but at the same time, it gave her a new sense of purpose. While searching the castle's library, she found an old, dusty, and time-worn diary that had belonged to one of her ancestors, Arthur Riverton. The diary revealed not only Arthur's dark actions, but also the complex web of events that led to Edward's curse. Beatrice read Arthur's accounts with a mix of horror and fascination. He described the envy he felt towards Edward, a nobleman with a free spirit and a kind heart, who had won the love of the people and the woman Arthur desired. "I couldn't bear to see Edward thrive while I, a true Riverton, was relegated to the shadows," Arthur wrote on one of the ink-stained pages. "Anger and jealousy consumed me until I found a final solution, to imprison him forever." "So, it was out of jealousy and envy that you were condemned," Beatrice murmured to herself, Arthur's words echoing in her mind. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Edward, his expression sad and resigned. "I knew Arthur was behind it," Edward said, his ethereal voice heavy with ancient pain. But I never imagined resentment could go to such an extreme. We have to undo this, Edward, Beatrice declared, determined. I can't change the past, but I can do whatever it takes to right the wrongs of my family. Beatrice's resolve was tested as she began to feel the presence of the vengeful spirits of the old Riverdens. They appeared as shadows and whispers, trying to intimidate her and dissuade her from her mission. One night, while she was studying the diary by candlelight, she felt a chill run down her spine. The flames flickered, and suddenly, the spectral figure of Arthur Riverden appeared before her. Do you dare challenge our family's legacy? Arthur roared, his ghostly eyes gleaming with cold anger. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with, foolish girl. Beatrice, despite the fear that gripped her, lifted her chin with determination. I will free Edward and end this curse, she said firmly. No matter what you or any other spirit does to stop me. Arthur laughed, a hollow, haunted sound. You don't know what you're saying, he said before disappearing, leaving Beatrice alone with her courage and resolve. The following days were marked by increasingly intense encounters with the spirits. They tried to scare her, disrupt her investigations, and even physically attack her. On one particularly cold night, Beatrice almost fell down a staircase when she felt invisible hands pushing her. Edward appeared just in time, holding her and pulling her back to safety. I can't let you get hurt because of me, Edward said, his voice filled with concern. These spirits are dangerous. No, Beatrice replied, holding Edward's hand even though he couldn't physically feel her touch. We're going to do this together. I promise to free you, and I won't give up. In an attempt to find a way to appease the spirits, Beatrice delved deeper into Arthur's writings. She discovered a reconciliation ritual that could be the key to breaking the curse, but it required a personal sacrifice of great magnitude. The ritual involved confronting the spirits and asking for forgiveness on behalf of her family, an act that could either pacify the spirits or consume all of her life energy. I'll do it, Beatrice decided, sharing the discovery with Edward. If this is what's necessary to free you, then I'm willing to risk everything. No, Edward insisted, the anguish evident in his eyes. I can't let you sacrifice your life for me. I've already lost so much, losing you would be unbearable. Beatrice smiled tenderly, her heart heavy with the love she felt for Edward. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the sake of those we love. If this is what it takes, then so be it. Beatrice's courage and love were about to be tested to the limit as she prepared to face the vengeful Riverden spirits and reconcile the wrongs of the past. The journey that began with the discovery of a ghost trapped in time was now turning into a battle for redemption and true love, defying the barriers of time and destiny. As Beatrice delved deeper into the exploration of Riverden Castle, she felt a presence that was both strange and familiar. It was then that she met Lady Eleanor, a noblewoman who had lived in the castle centuries before and who, like Edward, was also trapped there as a spirit. Their first interaction was shrouded in an aura of distrust and curiosity. Lady Eleanor, with her regal bearing and piercing gaze, observed Beatrice with a mix of hope and caution. Who are you, and what are you seeking here? Lady Eleanor asked, her voice carrying the weight of years of isolation. Beatrice, initially frightened, took a deep breath and replied, My name is Beatrice. I'm here to help Edward. He told me about his curse, and I'm determined to free him. Lady Eleanor slowly approached, her dress floating as if submerged in water. Edward. Is he still here? She asked, surprise and pain visible in her spectral eyes. Yes, he is, Beatrice confirmed. And it seems like you knew him well. From that initial encounter, an unexpected friendship began to form between Beatrice and Lady Eleanor. The noble ghost revealed secrets about Edward's life that only a close confidant could know. She spoke about the young Prince Edward had been, his kindness, his bravery, and above all, his generous heart. Edward was always different from the other nobles, Lady Eleanor said in one of the many conversations she and Beatrice had. He truly cared about people, regardless of their social status. That, perhaps, was his downfall. Beatrice, fascinated and moved by the stories, felt increasingly connected not only to Edward but also to Lady Eleanor. The noble ghost became not only a source of valuable information but also a friend and advisor. Lady Eleanor offered guidance on how to handle the challenges Beatrice faced, especially those related to love and sacrifice. To love someone is to face challenges that often seem insurmountable, Lady Eleanor said on one occasion. But true love is the one that endures, even in the face of the darkest adversities. Inspired by Lady Eleanor's words, Beatrice found renewed strength to continue her mission. During one of their joint explorations of the castle, Beatrice and Lady Eleanor discovered an ancient hiding place behind a wall of loose stones. Inside this secret chamber were manuscripts and artifacts that contained more clues about the amulet and the true story of Edward. "Look here," exclaimed Beatrice, holding up an aged scroll. "This talks about an amulet that can break Edward's curse." Lady Eleanor approached, looking closely at the scroll. "Yes, this is the amulet Edward spoke of. But it also mentions a powerful spell. It will be a dangerous journey, Beatrice." Determined, Beatrice replied, "No matter how dangerous it is. I promised Edward the First would free him, and I won't give up now." Lady Eleanor smiled, a sad but proud smile. "You have a strong spirit, Beatrice. And I will be by your side, helping in any way I can." The friendship between Beatrice and Lady Eleanor not only strengthened Beatrice's determination but also gave her a new perspective on her own life and the choices she needed to make. Together, they unraveled ancient secrets, faced challenges, and discovered the true essence of sacrifice and love. In this process, Beatrice realized that to free Edward, it wasn't enough just to find the amulet. She would need to reconcile the wrongs of the past and face the vengeful spirits of the old Riverdens. Lady Eleanor, with her wisdom and experience, guided Beatrice every step of the way, becoming an indispensable ally in her journey. "Let's go, Beatrice," Lady Eleanor said at a crucial moment. "We have much to do and little time. But I believe in you. And I know Edward does too." With these words of encouragement, Beatrice felt a new wave of hope and determination. With Lady Eleanor by her side, she knew she could face any challenge that came her way. And so, their friendship became a powerful force, capable of overcoming even the oldest and darkest curses. In the dusty archives of the old Riverton Castle, Beatrice continued her relentless search for answers. As she ran her fingers over the shelves filled with scrolls and ancient manuscripts, she found a document that would change the course of her investigation. It was a letter from Lord Alastair, a royal advisor who lived in the same era as Edward. The letter, filled with intrigue and betrayal, revealed that Alastair had plotted against Edward, driven by an insatiable desire for power and influence. With a racing heart, Beatrice shared the discovery with Edward and Lady Eleanor. "Edward, I found something that might explain why you're trapped here," she said, holding the letter with trembling hands. Edward, materializing beside Beatrice, observed the document with intense eyes. "Lord Alastair? I should have suspected. He was always too ambitious, willing to do anything to rise in the court," Edward said, his voice filled with bitterness. Lady Eleanor, who had maintained a serene posture until then, became visibly disturbed. "Lord Alastair was a dangerous man. If he was truly behind your betrayal, Edward, we need to be cautious. His descendants may be just as unscrupulous," she warned. Determined to find out more, Beatrice continued to examine the documents. Among the papers, she found records of a secret society formed by Alastair's descendants. This society, according to the writings, had the goal of keeping Edward trapped forever, ensuring that his power and influence were never restored. Fear gripped her, but the will to free Edward was stronger. "We need to find these descendants and stop them," Beatrice declared, with renewed determination. "They might still be active, and if what's written here is true, they won't stop at anything to keep Edward trapped." Edward nodded, his expression grave. "We don't have time to lose. If this society still exists, they might be planning something to make my imprisonment even stronger." With Lady Eleanor's help, Beatrice began tracing the lineage of Alistair's descendants, tracking them to the present day. It didn't take long for her to find clues about their modern activities. Among these clues were mentions of secret meetings and dark rituals held in isolated locations. "We have to go there," Beatrice said, determined. "We can't let them continue with their plans." "But it will be dangerous," Lady Eleanor warned. "These people will not hesitate to use violence to protect their secrets." "I know," Beatrice replied, with a resolute gleam in her eyes. "But I can't abandon Edward now. We've come too far." With the plan laid out, Beatrice, accompanied by Edward and Lady Eleanor, infiltrated one of these meetings. The location was an old mansion, far from civilization, where the members of the secret society gathered under the leadership of a sinister man, clearly one of Alistair's descendants. Beatrice watched everything from a hidden spot, trying to gather as much information as possible. "We need to act now," Edward whispered. "They're about to perform a ritual that could make my imprisonment eternal." Beatrice took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. "Let's stop this," she declared firmly. "We're going to free you, Edward." The night was filled with tension as Beatrice, Edward, and Lady Eleanor prepared to face the secret society. Every step was calculated, every move carefully planned. They knew they couldn't afford to fail. With courage and determination, Beatrice was ready to face any danger, any conspiracy, to see Edward free again. As Beatrice and Edward grew closer, a new chapter of their story unfolded, revealing a romance that transcended the boundaries of time. One day, sitting by a Gothic window in the castle, Edward decided to tell Beatrice about his past love, a painful chapter he had kept hidden until then. "Beatrice," Edward said with a melancholic look, "there's something I need to share with you. Before I died, I was promised to a woman of high nobility. But my heart belonged to someone else." Beatrice, surprised but curious, asked gently, "Who was she, Edward?" "Her name was Margaret," he replied with a deep sigh. "She was a peasant, a young woman with a free spirit and infinite kindness. Our love was genuine, but it was forbidden by the social norms of the time. The difference in our social classes made our love unacceptable to many, especially to my father." Beatrice felt a pang of pain in her heart as she listened to Edward's story. "And what happened to her?" she asked, fearing the answer. Edward looked out at the horizon, lost in his memories. "When my father discovered our relationship, he was furious. He ordered Margaret to be taken away from me, sending her to a distant and remote place. She was forced to leave everything behind, and I was powerless, unable to protect her." Beatrice felt deep empathy for Edward's pain. "That's terrible, Edward. But why have you never mentioned this before?" "I feared that the memory of Margaret might drive us apart," Edward confessed. "But now I see that you have the right to know the whole truth. Our bond is strong, Beatrice, and I don't want anything to come between us." Beatrice took Edward's hand, feeling the coldness of his ghostly form, which paradoxically warmed her heart. "Edward, nothing will change what I feel for you. Your story only makes me understand the depth of your heart better. You love truly, and that's something I respect and admire." Edward looked at Beatrice with gratitude. "You are amazing, Beatrice. Your support means everything to me." The revelation of this forbidden love brought a new layer of depth to the relationship between Beatrice and Edward. They began to share more intimate moments, exploring the castle together and uncovering secrets that seemed to hide in every corner. Each discovery brought them closer, as if their souls were destined to meet. One night, as they walked through the silent corridors, Beatrice suddenly stopped and looked at Edward. "Edward, if you could change the past, what would you do?" He thought for a moment before replying. "I would fight harder for Margaret, stand up to my father and the social conventions. But now, with you by my side, I feel like I have a second chance to fight for what's right." Beatrice smiled, feeling empowered by his words. "Then let's fight together, Edward. We'll overcome all barriers, whether they're social or temporal." The days that followed were filled with new discoveries and challenges. Each step they took in the castle, each riddle they solved, brought them closer to freeing Edward and, at the same time, strengthened the love they felt for each other. The story of Margaret and Edward, marked by pain and sacrifice, now served as a powerful reminder that true love can overcome any adversity. Beatrice felt like she was living in a dark fairy tale where the line between past and present blurred. And as they got closer to the final solution to free Edward, she knew that whatever the outcome, her love for him was eternal and unbreakable. The forbidden romance between Edward and Margaret wasn't just a painful memory, but a testament to the fact that true love is immortal, defying all barriers imposed by time and society. And now, Beatrice and Edward were ready to write a new chapter, where love triumphed over fear and pain, illuminating even the darkest corners of Riverton Castle. Beatrice, determined to free Edward from his ghostly prison, discovered that the descendants of Lord Alistair were planning a sinister ritual to reinforce the curse that kept him trapped in Riverton Castle. The tension in the air was palpable as she prepared for the upcoming battle. She knew she had to act quickly before Alistair's secret society could carry out their plans. With the help of Lady Eleanor's spirit, Beatrice managed to infiltrate the secret society's clandestine meeting. The atmosphere was heavy, full of whispers and suspicious glances. She walked through the dark corridors, trying not to make any noise. She found herself in a large room, lit only by candles, where Alistair's descendants were gathered around an ancient stone altar. The aura of danger was almost suffocating. "We need to reinforce the prison before the girl interferes," said an austere-looking man, clearly one of the society's leaders. Beatrice, hidden behind a column, listened carefully, her heart pounding. She tried to memorize every detail of the ritual they were discussing. At any moment, she could be discovered. Lady Eleanor was beside her, offering words of encouragement. "Stay calm, Beatrice. You can do this," Lady Eleanor whispered, her ethereal voice bringing a sense of peace. Beatrice continued to observe, but suddenly one of the society members turned, noticing her presence. "Who's there?" he shouted, raising a torch. With no time to think, Beatrice ran, trying to escape the hands that reached for her. She felt a tug on her arm but managed to break free, running through the labyrinthine corridors of the castle. Lady Eleanor guided her, showing her secret passages and hidden paths. "This way, quickly," Eleanor exclaimed, pointing to a door hidden behind a tapestry. Beatrice slipped inside, closing the door quickly. Her heart was racing, but she knew she had obtained valuable information. She needed to get out of the castle and plan her next move. She had discovered crucial details about the ritual and the weaknesses of Alistair's descendants. This gave her an advantage, but it also meant she was in imminent danger. Meeting Edward in one of the castle's less frequented corridors, Beatrice told him everything she had seen. "Edward, they're planning to strengthen the curse. We need to act quickly," she said, her voice full of urgency. Edward, with a worried expression, responded, "This is worse than we thought. But now we have a chance. Let's use this information to our advantage." With the help of Lady Eleanor and Edward, Beatrice began to formulate a plan. They knew that the final battle was inevitable and that they would need to face Alistair's descendants head-on. The preparation involved several sleepless nights, studying ancient texts and developing strategies to combat the secret society. Every detail was meticulously planned, taking into account Edward's ghostly abilities and Beatrice's historical knowledge. On the decisive night, Beatrice and her allies prepared for the confrontation. The castle was wrapped in an unsettling silence, as if it were waiting for the events to unfold. Beatrice felt a mix of fear and determination, knowing that she couldn't fail. Edward's freedom and the peace of the castle's spirits depended on her. "Are we ready?" Beatrice asked, looking at Edward and Lady Eleanor. "Yes," Edward replied firmly. "Let's end this." With that resolve, Beatrice, Edward, and Lady Eleanor set off to confront the secret society, fully aware that the battle would be tough, but with the hope that, in the end, love and justice would prevail. Beatrice finally felt that she was close to uncovering the mystery surrounding Riverton Castle. The search for the lost amulet had been long and full of challenges, but the determination to free Edward, the ghost who had captivated her deeply, drove her to keep going. After facing complex riddles and treacherous traps left by the castle's ancient inhabitants, she was finally about to find the object that could break the curse. She found herself in a small underground room of the castle, whose damp stone walls seemed to whisper ancient secrets. There was a cavity in the center of the room, hidden beneath a heavy stone slab. With effort, Beatrice managed to remove the slab, revealing an intricately carved wooden box. Her hands trembled with excitement and nervousness as she opened the box, revealing the amulet. It was a magnificent piece, made of gold and encrusted with precious stones that glowed with a light of their own. "This is it," Beatrice whispered, carefully picking up the amulet. Suddenly, an invisible force repelled her, throwing her against the wall. She felt a sharp pain in her back, but the sight of Edward appearing by her side made her momentarily forget the pain. "Beatrice, are you okay?" Edward asked, his voice filled with concern. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied, struggling to stand. "But the amulet is protected by a powerful spell." Edward looked at the amulet, his eyes reflecting centuries of knowledge. "Lady Eleanor and I can help you decipher the spell. But you need to be strong, Beatrice. This won't be easy." Lady Eleanor, who always appeared with an aura of serenity, materialized beside them. "Beatrice, the spell protecting the amulet was created to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. We need wisdom and courage to overcome it." The three joined forces, combining their knowledge and skills. Edward and Lady Eleanor guided Beatrice through the complex magical riddles surrounding the amulet. Every word and gesture had to be precise, as a single mistake could be fatal. It was a delicate dance between the past and the present, between the world of the living and the dead. Beatrice recited the ancient words, feeling the power of the spell fighting against her. An intense light emanated from the amulet, enveloping her in an almost unbearable heat. She could hear the whispers of the old Rivertons, the guardians of the spell, trying to distract her. But Edward's calm voice guided her, keeping her focused. "You can do this, Beatrice." "Just a little more," Edward said, his tone firm and encouraging. Finally, with one last effort, Beatrice broke the magical barrier. A burst of energy swept through the room, almost knocking her down again. When the light faded, she was holding the amulet, feeling a strong energy emanating from it. "You did it," Lady Eleanor said, with a smile of approval. "The amulet is in your hands, but remember, the real test is yet to come." Beatrice knew that the battle was far from over. Possessing the amulet was just one step in her journey to free Edward. She felt the heavy responsibility on her shoulders, but also a renewed determination. She looked at Edward, who watched her with a mixture of gratitude and hope. "Let's go, Beatrice," Edward said. We need to prepare for what's next. The real fight is still ahead, and we need to be ready. Beatrice nodded, holding the amulet firmly. I'm ready, Edward. Let's free you once and for all. With the amulet in hand and her spiritual allies by her side, Beatrice felt invincible. She knew she would face even greater dangers, but the bond she shared with Edward gave her the strength needed to keep going. Edward's fate was now in her hands, and she was determined to free him, no matter the sacrifices she had to make. The journey continued, and the love that had blossomed between them would be the key to overcoming any obstacle. The final confrontation was imminent. Beatrice, with the amulet in hand, knew she needed to face Alistair's descendants in the castle's main hall. The air was heavy with palpable tension, and she could feel the evil presence approaching. Edward and Lady Eleanor, though in ethereal forms, were by her side, ready to face the unfolding destiny. As she entered the main hall, Beatrice saw that Alistair's descendants were already there, prepared to reinforce Edward's prison with a dark ritual. Beatrice's eyes glowed with determination. You won't succeed, she shouted, advancing with the amulet. The leader of the descendants, a man with a cold and calculating gaze, laughed disdainfully. You're just a girl. What do you think you can do against us? Beatrice raised the amulet, feeling the energy pulse through it. I have something you don't, the truth and justice on my side. With a swift movement, she began to recite the enchantment she had learned, her words echoing through the hall. The ensuing battle was intense. Ghosts and humans collided in a chaotic dance of light and shadows. Edward, using his spectral powers, took down one opponent after another, while Lady Eleanor defended Beatrice from the fiercest attacks. However, Alistair's descendants were numerous and possessed dark powers that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. Beatrice knew she needed to use the amulet to weaken the descendants' powers. With renewed courage, she raised the amulet above her head and channeled all her will into it. A bright light emanated from the artifact, hitting Alistair's descendants like a wave of purifying energy. They screamed in agony as their powers were drained and their strength visibly diminished. But victory came at a cost. Amid the chaos, Beatrice was struck by a treacherous attack, an invisible blade that cut her skin. She fell to the ground, gravely injured, feeling life slowly slipping away. Edward rushed to her, desperation etched on his ghostly face. Beatrice, hold on, he pleaded. With her last strength, Beatrice held Edward's hand. I will free you, Edward. I promise. She began reciting the final ritual, her words weak but filled with unbreakable determination. The light from the amulet grew even brighter, engulfing the entire hall in a blinding glow. Alistair's descendants tried to resist, but they were too weak to stop the inevitable. One by one, they fell, their corrupted energies dissipated by the purifying light. Edward and Lady Eleanor watched with admiration and sorrow, knowing Beatrice was sacrificing everything for them. Finally, Beatrice completed the ritual. A burst of light enveloped the castle, dispelling the shadows and bringing an unprecedented peace to its ancient corridors. The spirits of the Riverton family began to appear, their faces calm and grateful as the curse that had haunted the castle for centuries was finally broken. Edward, now free from his spectral prison, looked around, feeling the change in the air. He knelt beside Beatrice, invisible tears falling from his eyes. Beatrice, you did it. You freed me. Beatrice weakly smiled, her eyes heavy. I always knew that true love could overcome any barrier, she whispered before closing her eyes, exhausted. The light filling the hall began to fade, revealing a new scene where peace and tranquility replaced darkness and despair. Edward, now free, held Beatrice in his arms, ready to face the future they had earned through so much sacrifice and courage. When the light finally dissipated, Beatrice blinked several times, trying to adjust her eyes to the new scene. The main hall of Riverton Castle, once filled with shadows and ghosts, now glowed with a soft, welcoming light. In the center of the hall, where Edward once stood as an ethereal specter, he now stood in flesh and blood. Beatrice could hardly believe what she saw. Her heart raced, and a mix of relief and disbelief washed over her. "Edward," Beatrice said, her voice choked with emotion. He turned to her, and the look they exchanged was full of unspoken feelings. Edward, with a gentle smile, walked toward Beatrice, his steps echoing through the silent hall. "Beatrice, you did it," he said, his voice now firm and full of life. Beatrice brought her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back tears. "Edward, you're alive?" she asked, still struggling to process what was before her eyes. Edward nodded, holding Beatrice's hands in his. "Yes, Beatrice. The amulet not only broke the curse that trapped me, but also gave me a second chance at life. And it's all thanks to you." They embraced, and Beatrice felt the warmth of Edward's body, a stark contrast to the coldness that once surrounded him as a ghost. In that moment, all the dangers and challenges they had faced faded from her mind, replaced by a sense of peace and happiness. The happiness, however, didn't stop there. Suddenly, the hall was filled with a golden light, and Beatrice and Edward turned to see the spirits of Lady Eleanor and the old Riverton family materializing before them. Lady Eleanor, with her serene and benevolent gaze, stepped forward. "Beatrice," Lady Eleanor began, her voice echoing softly through the hall, "you have shown a courage and love that transcends time. Thanks to you, the spirits of all of us can finally rest in peace." The spirits of the old Rivertons, who once seemed so vengeful and full of resentment, now displayed expressions of gratitude and serenity. One of the spirits, whom Beatrice recognized as her own ancestor, Lord Riverton, spoke. "You have restored our family's honor and freed us from a burden we carried for generations. We are eternally grateful." Beatrice, still holding Edward, felt a wave of warmth and gratitude flow through her. "I only did what I felt was right," she replied humbly. Lady Eleanor smiled and stepped closer, reaching out to lightly touch Beatrice's face. "Your love and sacrifice will not be forgotten. We bless your union and promise eternal protection. May your love be a beacon of hope for all who come after." With these words, the spirits began to slowly dissipate, their forms becoming increasingly ethereal until they disappeared completely. The hall, now free of any supernatural presence, seemed brighter and more welcoming than ever. Edward and Beatrice looked at each other, a new world of possibilities opening before them. "The castle is different," Beatrice said, looking around. "It feels at peace." Edward smiled, pulling her closer. "And it's all thanks to you, Beatrice. You not only freed me but also brought peace to this place. Riverton Castle is now a symbol of eternal love and triumph." Beatrice felt a tear roll down her face, but this time it was a tear of pure happiness. "We did it together, Edward. And now, we have all the time in the world to live our love." They kissed, sealing a bond that had defied and overcome the barriers of time and curses. Riverton Castle, once a place of shadows and painful secrets, now shone as a beacon of hope and rebirth. Beatrice and Edward knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, strengthened by the love and courage that united them. Good night and enchanted dreams.